Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name's Thomas, back on the channel today with a very special video. Today we're going to be discussing the potential ownership of 777 Partners. Now, a lot has been discussed about the investment group across Twitter. There have been many allegations thrown at them across various articles, but a man who's very much been at the forefront of the discussion on this through his investigative pieces, on Josimar. We've decided to go with Josimar, whatever the pronunciation is. That man is, of course, Paul Brown. Paul joins me today. He's going to try and give us a bit of insight into what on earth is going on behind the investment into the club, who we might be getting into bed with, and their past history in football. So, Paul, thank you very much for coming on. I know you've done a few of these discussions about 777 now. So how do you feel kind of going into these podcasts? What's your initial impression? Is it I'm gonna go out on a limb here and suggest that maybe it's not going to be the most positive of discussions about the group. So how do you feel going into these podcasts talking about them?
Look, I think everyone should have an open mind, and I think that balance is important. And I get that Everton fans want to have hope of a better future, and I'm sure there are some who are so worried about what they've heard behind the scenes in terms of possible threats of administration and the various other threats hanging over the club, that they are only too willing to believe that anyone who comes along is better than that. What I would say, though, is a colleague of mine recently tweeted that there are more red flags here with this particular group than you would see at a Chinese Communist Party rally. And the more I look into them, the more I find it very hard to disagree with that.
Yeah, and I'm sure people have seen your article. If they haven't already, you should definitely check that out after the video. You should definitely watch it first. And a few of the buzzwords that are immediately thrown out in your headline, the likes of fraud, kidnapping, extortion. Of course, all allegations that we must stress. Nothing's been proven yet. But let's start by kind of talking about who they are away from football, because we know that they have investment in quite a few clubs. But before we get into that, kind of just want to start off with who they are, where they made their money, where has this all of a sudden come from? Because by the sounds of it, building a multi-club portfolio was never really part of their vision.
No, I mean, the guy that you will see out there most often is Josh Wander. He's one of the founding partners. He likes to do all the interviews and PR for this firm. He was recently interviewed in the FT and on a business podcast, where he kind of explains some of the thinking behind the group. And he is on record and quite open about the fact that they never started buying football clubs to build a multi-club portfolio. They did it for other reasons. They were initially investing in revenue streams, things like TV rights. And then they decided that they started to see reasons why buying the actual clubs themselves might be a good thing, might help the business in general. The problems that they've encountered are manifold, though. And when you look at the clubs, many of them have struggled on the pitch. Many of them are in huge financial distress. They tend to buy distressed assets, whether it's football clubs or any other business that is failing, because they see a bargain and a way to build that business up and release some of its potential. The problem is that in football in particular, but also in some of their other investments, you're not really seeing many improvements financially to a lot of these clubs. We did quite a deep dive into a couple of them, and for instance, Standard Liège is a complete mess behind the scenes. It's difficult to see how they've improved the situation at many of these clubs. I mean, in the case of Standard, the situation is so dire that 777 were even ordered by the Belgian licensing authorities to provide monthly updates proving that players were being paid on time and the transfer commitments were being met. The fact that the team is struggling on the pitch and its manager quit because he apparently did not like what 777 was saying and was accusing them of failing to back up their ambitions in terms of spending probably hasn't helped. But this is just one example. You asked who they are and where their money comes from. They claim to be a private investment fund and say that it's all their own money, that they're investing in these clubs and various other things around the world. The issue with that is that none of these people are billionaires, and it's a lot of money. If you try to investigate the source of funding for 777, you're immediately hit with a brick wall of offshore companies and accounts that are not available to the public in jurisdictions that where it's possible to do that kind of thing. So it's very difficult to say what the source of their money is. What we do know is that both Josh Wander and his managing partner, a guy called Stephen Pascoe, essentially made their money in the insurance and reinsurance market in Miami and later in other parts of the States as well. And that is the one very successful part of the 777 empire. However, it's also the part of the empire where several people have brought lawsuits in the States claiming to be the victims of exploitation by this company. And some of them contain some really quite shocking allegations, none of which have been proven in court yet. They are all currently at various different stages, but we only reported ones that were active. And everything that we reported has been documented on legal dockets and put before a judge who at some point will have to rule about all of these cases. So I guess that's them in a nutshell, really. The two main players are Josh Wander and Stephen Pascoe. They are the guys whose faces you will see the most if you look into their clubs around the world. But as I say, I think there are plenty of questions to answer about where the money comes from, how much money they've managed to raise, and all of the kind of business practices that they were involved in their past.
Yeah, and everything that you said, it hints towards kind of an air of mystery around them. And the club not the club, an article has promised that they will be communicated with fans, shareholders. I know that, of course, the Esk on Twitter, he's, I think, seemingly established some sort of communication with them. And people who are searching for, some sign of kind of credibility might look towards Josh Wander being appointed to the European Clubs Association, which, by the sounds of it, isn't necessarily, I don't want to say it's not necessarily a positive thing, but sort of the procedure that went on there, the process of how that happened, and his response to that doesn't necessarily bring with it any sort of major credibility. So if you could give us a bit of insight just into the ECA, how he's ended up in this position, because all of a sudden this man who they've had varying, success is a difficult word to use, varying dealings with football clubs around the world that have seemingly ended up still in very financial difficulties. You mentioned Standard Liège. I'm sure a lot of Everton fans have seen the story about Genoa, that they're now trying to get the fans to raise the 5 million that's going towards some sort of training facility. So when the story emerged that Josh Wander had been appointed to the ECA, I think a lot of people were probably quite confused. So what is the story there?
Well, look, it's a very prestigious role. He's only on. It's a minor position on the board, but it's still a prestigious role because this is an organisation with great influence in European football. It's clearly why he decided to run for it. It is a slightly strange situation though, because we spoke to several people who were at the assembly meeting where Josh Wander was elected onto this board. And none of them knew who he was. He didn't pose for any photographs with them. He doesn't seem to have introduced himself really to people at the meeting. And he ran unopposed in a slot where there was no other candidate running. So the process itself is interesting. He didn't do any interviews. He's not in any of the media shots. It's a bit strange if you are trumpeting the fact that you have managed to get on this very prestigious board, and it's clearly being used as a mark of credibility, which it would be for anyone, to then refuse to do any interviews about it or any media, and to not be working the room, shall we say. I think a few people that we spoke to found that a bit odd. And I know that he was elected because of his role at Standard Liège. And we've been told that there are several other clubs in Belgium who are quite surprised and not terribly pleased that he has managed to get himself onto this board. So I think it will be interesting to see how that one goes.
And it's maybe not just necessarily the mystery around who they are. As you said, he's not been giving interviews despite being elected to this prestigious role. He's not really associating himself with the media. But the other mystery, well, main mystery, is probably surrounding how they're going to fund the purchase of 94% of a Premier League club. Because when you look around the rest of their investments, as you mentioned, Standard Liège, they're still on the fence about the Belgian authorities. Obviously, you have to get your license. They're monitoring all of their kind of financial dealings. We know about the protests at like Hertha Berlin, Vasco da Gama, and when you look at their other business interests, including investments in airlines, Peruvian football as well. I do want to get onto that because that's a really interesting story that I had no idea about until just a moment ago. And I think the main question is how are they going to fund this? Because if you look at the rest of their investments, it seemingly, I don't want to say strapped for cash, but it doesn't seem like they exactly have cash flowing through them. And now they're trying to invest in a flagship of their multi-club model, which the financial restraints that come with that are probably much more vast than most of the dealings that they've made so far.
Look, I think this is why there are questions to answer, really. I understand that a private business, private company has no need really to go out there and say, look, this is where our funds are coming from. That's entirely their own right. However, this is a football club and it has fans, and I think fans have a right to know. Questions are being asked about this particular takeover because none of these people individually appear to have the funding available to do this in their own right, despite them claiming that this is all their own money. So the money is clearly coming from somewhere else. Why not just come out and explain it to everyone? Buying Everton is not going to be cheap. Although the initial outlay to buy Everton is probably not going to be a lot. I say that because Moshiri's shareholding is currently not really worth very much money. Now I've heard the figure 500 million bandied about as a purchase price, a potential purchase price for Everton. I would be very surprised if it's impossible to see that being the fee that 777 or anyone else ever pays to Moshiri for a start. That seems completely ludicrous because it just isn't worth that money. And if you look at how they did some of their other takeovers, it's very interesting because there are similarities. If, for instance, you look at Hertha Berlin, we were told, and the figures were quoted publicly, that was a 65 million euro takeover. However, it's since come out in court in London that the previous owner has received less than 15 million euros for that club. And it's very possible that the deal for Everton is done in a similar way. We're already told that it's performance related. We're already told that the price paid will differ if the club is a Premier League club or not, depending on how this season goes and what happens at next month's cost control hearing in front of the Premier League. It is entirely possible that Moshiri receives a very modest sum up front for his stake, and that the rest is dependent on very many other conditional factors. And in the case of the Hertha Berlin owner, he's still waiting for the rest. One of the performance-related payments, apparently in that takeover, involves a pledge of an extra 35 million euros from 777, but only if Hertha Berlin win the Bundesliga. They're not currently even in the Bundesliga. So, it's difficult to know exactly how much will ever be paid for Everton. I say that it's going to be expensive, though, because it is not just Moshiri's shareholding. that is being sold here. You are also selling the debt around the club and the black hole in the stadium accounts. There are two existing lenders who I understand would both want repaying if this deal goes through. That is a significant amount of money. Then you have to come up with the rest of the stadium funding. We are no clearer on how 777 would attempt to do that. I think they may struggle to do that themselves. Mashiri was certainly struggling to do it himself. Where do they intend to raise the money for that? And then there is the day-to-day running of the club, which is not cheap. That they are taking on a financial commitment bigger than anything they've ever done in football before. And I think this is why it raises questions, and why this group in particular have more questions to answer than maybe other owners who come into football. I mean, even with Mashiri, you could see that as an independently wealthy man and a billionaire, he would have the money to do what he said he was going to do at Everton, if he wanted to, just with his own cash. This is clearly not the case with 777, and that is why people should be asking questions, in my opinion.
Yeah, plenty of... I keep using the word mystery, but mystery is kind of just the best way to sum up their dealings so far. And we will definitely get into the example of a multi-club model. Whatever people's opinions are on it, I think generally most are against. It's not really a traditional way of football, but in terms of the economic climate, it seems to be the direction we're going. City Football Group, we've known they've had success with that for a while. Seemingly Chelsea are trying to do that now as well. They've purchased Strasbourg. But before we go on to that, I do want to talk about away from football and the fact that, I mean, I'm going to let you just tell the story about their dealings in Peruvian football, because I do think it's a great example of kind of who we're, I said getting into bed with earlier on, but who we are dealing with here, because it's such a fascinating story about, clearly, and you mentioned quite often, distressed assets. Peru, not a country with a tremendous amount of money. They seemingly, I don't want to say a corrupt football governance, but certainly people who are under investigation. But if we could just stay on that story for a minute, because I think that is a fascinating one. So if you could just kind of talk us through that, and kind of gives us an insight into who we're dealing with here.
So when we started looking into this company, some people from Peru began to contact us, because one of the companies they own is a media rights arm, which recently bought the rights to the top flight in Peru, to screen top flight matches in Peru. Again, I'm told this deal didn't involve a huge amount of cash changing hands, and it has become very controversial because the president of the federation in Peru decided to do this deal basically himself. One of his former partners from the federation is a director of the company which bought the rights. It had no past experience of running TV companies in the region. It had no cameramen, producers, studios, nothing, no infrastructure. And it has since sublet, if that's the right word, that the rights out to online streaming services, which are pay-per-view. Now, Peru is not a rich country. Its fans were used to watching these games for free on Movistar, which is a huge global TV brand, who are edged out in this deal. Suddenly they're being asked to pay to watch their matches, and they're not doing it. They're all watching pirate streams instead, because they don't want to pay the money. And this company's business plan, and part of the agreement of the which was signed to do this deal, was that they would share profits with the clubs in the top flight. There won't be any profit to share if the company doesn't make a profit, and some estimates are that it's already making a loss of several $1 million, essentially. This is a big issue for clubs in Peru, because some of them rely so heavily on TV money that to lose it would be potentially disastrous. It could put some of them out of business. The crazy thing about this situation is that the president of the federation who did this deal is now under investigation by prosecutors there, accused of being part of a criminal enterprise. We spoke to prosecutors, we spoke to club owners. It's a very difficult situation, but the clubs are pretty upset at how things went, and some of them refused to go along with the deal, and they were threatened with all kinds of things by the federation if they didn't go along with it. And I believe all but one of those clubs has now relented and given in and allowed the TV cameras in, but for a while some of them were refusing to even do that. It looks ultimately as if the president is going to end up in court at some point over this deal. Prosecutors are certainly going after him. They've done raids on offices in Peru. And as far as I'm aware, the actual contract that he signed with this 777 company has still not been made publicly available. So, I mean, I find that just an absolutely incredible situation, and it's why we included it in our article, because the club owners there were certainly worried that not just their clubs, but the league itself would fold because of the implications of all of this.
Yeah, now when I first heard about that story, I was absolutely fascinated, and I'm sure it'll be one that people keep a keen eye on for the rest of the time. But just kind of to bring us back to England, really, and I'm sure people will have seen about their investment in the British Basketball League as well. And the term administration has been kind of thrown around by Everton fans. We've seen it a couple of times, quite tentatively at times, but maybe something that's very much threatening the Basketball League currently. So seemingly they've also missed payments over there. So what's the current kind of situation over
there? Messy, in a word. Again, we spoke to various stakeholders involved in British basketball, and they all expressed a lot of disquiet with 777. The company is accused of being late with investment payments into the league. It owns 45% of the league. It promised a £7 million investment. At the time, the press release kind of made it seem as if they'd already paid the £7 million. They hadn't. It still hasn't all been paid, and we're months and months later down the line. These late payments have had a severe knock-on effect on the league in general. And the other issue with this in basketball terms is that because 777 own the London Lions, they have also been late with payments to contractors who work for that club. Now, you might have seen a recent article in the Times where the chair of the BBL confirms all this. He wrote to 777 expressing that his clubs are not happy, and that the fact the Lions had not been paying their own contractors was hurting the other clubs, because the same companies were refusing to work with them. We're talking about the people who do the flooring and the LED scoreboards, that kind of thing in the venues. It's a reason why the fixtures were released much later for this season than was expected. The clubs therefore couldn't sell season tickets because fixtures hadn't been confirmed. It put all of their businesses in jeopardy, basically, and that was all in a letter that the chair of the BBL wrote to 777. There's since been a board meeting where 777 reaffirmed their commitment to the BBL, and also promised to put more funding into the league, in fact. The issue, though, is that I'm not sure the clubs have any faith in anything that 777 say anymore. Some of them are so furious that they are refusing to back down. They Some of them believe that the league was heading for insolvency in the way it had been run, largely because of 777's involvement and the issues with them paying their bills. I don't think this is going away anytime soon, despite this extra commitment from 777. We'll see what happens. And there is now a review into their ownership of the Lions going on, which is going to look at whether they are fit and proper persons to own that club. And there is also an investigation revealed by the Telegraph going on by the licensing body, which is the governing body of the BBL. This is called the BBF, who have also raised concerns about 777 and their business practices. So there are growing concerns basically in the basketball world about this company. And despite the fact that they say they remain committed to basketball, I don't think many of the other clubs, the member clubs of the BBL, believe them.
Great, that's filling everyone with confidence, I'm sure. And now I think we've got a pretty good idea of who they are away from football. They do have some fairly significant investments in clubs, not only across Europe, also across the world. I'm sure you've probably spoken now to plenty of fans with their investment through your work, and I'm sure people have reached out to you. So how have you gauged the general opinion of clubs that have now, the investment's been there for some time now? They've been able to see the impact of it, because it's easy. We can look at Twitter. We can see that the Hertha Berlin protest, probably the most visible, I'd say, with their protests at the game. But what have you gauged from fans of clubs who have had this investment for some time now? What's their kind of reaction been to the investment?
It's different from club to club, and to be fair to 777, they've not been in situ at all of these clubs for very long. To start with Genoa, for example, I think of all the fans that we've spoken to and looked at, they seem the most willing to give these guys a chance at Genoa, actually. It was the first club that 777 owned a majority stake in, I believe. They've not been there very long. They were relegated, but that was on the cards already. You can't really blame 777 for that. They've been promoted back. I think they have some hope that maybe this could be a good thing for them. They're kind of in the minority, though, I have to say, amongst fan bases of all their clubs. The 777 own Vasco in Brazil. The fans there are absolutely furious with them. They are so upset with the running of the club that they didn't just march on the Rio offices of the company. They sent expats to march outside the offices of the company in Miami with placards and flags and anti-777 material, which is quite some devotion to the cause of protest, really. Yes, there have been banners at Hertha Berlin. That situation is a little bit more complicated because in Germany you have the 50+1 rule, and 777 are not supposed to have absolute control over the club. The deal originally was looked at by the licensing body, and they were not convinced it would pass, so they had to tweak the agreement before it was passed, and Hertha were granted a license. But their fans were not at all impressed by recent comments from Josh Wander suggesting that he thinks there's a new wave of commercialization coming to football and that fans of clubs can't wait to be monetized. That did not go down well. It didn't go down well with fans of Red Star in Paris either, who these guys are on another level when it comes to protests, and I think you'll be hearing a lot more from them in the coming weeks. It's a lower league club in France, but a very historic one, a very left-wing one. They are not at all happy with 777. And obviously, fans of Standard Liège are not happy either. Their club is really struggling on the pitch. I think they were alarmed by some of the things that we revealed in the last Josimar article. and they have also been staging protests. So protest seems to be a common theme against these owners, and it's why I think, Everton fans who might hope for the best with 777 should really look at that and wonder why there are so many fans of their other clubs who are also unhappy with them.
Yeah, we're no stranger to protesting against the owners of our club, obviously over at Everton. And this might sound like a bit of a selfish question, and it probably is. And it's maybe a tricky one to answer without a crystal ball. But let's say hypothetically, this deal is wrapped up. Of course, there's still question marks over that. Who knows where that funding is going to come from? Who knows if they're going to pass through all the regulatory bodies? But from a selfish perspective, in this era of multi-club models, there always tends to be a flagship club. Of course, at the City Football Group, that has to be Manchester City. You'd imagine that if this deal goes through, Everton will be their flagship club. Without going too much into kind of our own personal opinions on multi-club models, on the commercialization of football, do you see this going any differently for Everton fans? Because there's, as we kind of discussed at the top of the show, there are major gaps in funding across the club. They're already having to loan us money, seemingly on a monthly basis, to kind of keep the lights on. And you mentioned quite a few times they invest in distressed assets. We are remarkably distressed. I think that's a great word to describe it. But again, kind of without a crystal ball, this may be hard to answer. But because we will be the main club in their portfolio, do you see it maybe going any differently to their other clubs?
It's difficult to know because the sheer scale of the problems at Everton are so much bigger than anything else they've had to try and deal with before. And this is why funding is an issue. And this is why I think fans deserve answers as to how much they've got, where it's coming from, what they intend to do with it, what the business plan is. I've realised that until the deal is ratified, if it's ratified, it may be difficult for them to answer these questions. But certainly if 777 end up owning Everton, they're going to need to come out and try and explain what the plan is. When you have a flagship club in your multi-club model, it kind of does give you a different position in the market. It gives you the ability to send academy players out to smaller clubs in your portfolio to build them up. It gives you the ability to try and use some of those other clubs as feeder clubs to bring players in. I just struggle to see what advantages in those terms there are in some of the clubs that 777 own. I can't really see Red Star producing a player that is going to end up in Everton's first team. I can't see a reason why you would send someone from Everton's academy to play for Vasco. Those things seem a little far-fetched. There are other things you can do with a multi-club model, which may benefit Everton if they become part of one. But also in purely business terms, having a flagship club makes your whole portfolio much more valuable. And I think you need to ask yourself whether the end game here for 777 is to sell this portfolio to another investor. Are they here for the long term to build all these clubs up, or are they just here to monetize them and make a profit and sell to somebody else? Again, these are questions that only the company itself can answer.
Yeah, still plenty of questions to be answered, and hopefully we do get the answers to those in the coming months. We'll have to see if the purchase does get ratified. We'll have to see. There is a lot of waiting and seeing here, and you can see why Everton fans are trying to put a positive spin on it, because we have been in such financial ruin for quite a while now, and it is getting, well, it's been serious for quite a while, but I think now it's becoming very serious on the surface, and I think our financial problems are now being taken quite seriously generally by the British media, where they've been bubbling under the surface for quite a while now, and it is now getting to the point where it is now getting national attention of the situation we're in. If 777 will be the answer, as I said, we will have to wait and see. But Paul, that does pretty much bring me to the end of my question. So thank you very much for coming on today and giving us a bit of that extra insight into who might be running our club. I hope our listeners have maybe gained some extra insight. I'm not sure we can really say it's alleviated anyone's concerns, but it's certainly given us all a much broader perspective of who might be running the club. So thank you very much, Paul. If any of our viewers want to find you anywhere else, as they absolutely should, you've done some fantastic pieces, the ones we mentioned with Josmar so far. So how else can they find you after this video?
Well, I'm on Twitter as PB Sports Writer, and I do engage if people are respectful, shall we say. But that's for other people to decide. And you'll see further articles from me in Josmar in the coming weeks.
Great. Thank you all very much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. Let's hope that some of these kind of open-ended questions have answers somewhere down the line. Maybe this is something we will revisit with Paul, maybe once the deal gets ratified. And let's hope for a brighter future for Everton Football Club, whatever guise that may come under. So thank you all very much for watching, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues.